Hello, everybody. I am your host, Josh the Archon, or Josh is perfectly fine too. And welcome to Atheist Enlightenment. Very first thing that I would like to say is thank you to everybody who's watching on the comment section right now. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on by, stopping by, and listening to the content of the Atheist Enlightenment. It really means a lot. So thank you. The next thing that I would like to do is thank our Patreon supporters, Linear, Mikey Famine, TART, and Laura Magee. Thank you so much for actually helping us grow the community and also helping me do what I do. So I greatly appreciate that. And again, if anybody wants to support, you will see a link in the description below. Now, without further ado, tonight's show is going to be talking about determinism and God. So we're going to slowly talk about determinism in and of itself, and then we're going to elaborate into bringing determinism into the conception of God itself and how we can actually see that God might just be the deterministic process happening, and the theists, without necessarily knowing the causes and effects, are making an assumption that the causes and effects in and of themselves are God. So they're not really believing in the truth of a deity. They're actually just believing in the case of cause and effect. So I would like to introduce a very good friend of mine. I've worked with him beforehand, and I enjoy his show that is called The One Good Reason. Please help me introduce Mike Carey. Mike Carey. Sorry about that. Welcome to the Atheist Enlightenment, my friend. How are you doing today?
Doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing perfectly fine. Mike Carey is the founder or co-founder of The One Good Reason, or also called Tiger Talk. What we actually hear within Tiger Talk itself is have discussions with normal, ordinary individuals about very difficult concepts, such as love, such as family, such as parenting, and so on and so forth, and really drags those conversations to the layman viewer. And it's a beautiful thing, and I have enjoyed his show since the very beginning. And if you do want to check out his show, I do have the links to The One Good Reason in the description below. So you can actually go check it out. You can see his Twitter. You can also see the Facebook group. And if you want to check out some of the shows that he's already done, please check out Skeptic Haven. His shows will be on Skeptic Haven in order for you to just see. And if you really like it, hit that subscribe button. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the concept of determinism. So, when we talk about determinism, we're talking about certain aspects like causes and effects, correct? And what create those causes have certain effects within the environment that's around the natural world, in a sense. Is that what we're kind of talking about? Or are we talking about more of a deterministic, like metaphysics, in a sense?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of like saying the universe in its current state is the effect of its past and is the cause of its future.
Interesting.
At least that's the general idea. But I didn't come up with that. But yeah, that's basically the idea of determinism in and of itself. And then, of course, you have, when you split hairs with drilling down further, you'll have soft determinism. You might know that as compatibilism, which tries to marry the idea of cause and effect with basically freedom and responsibility. And then you'll have something, you might know it as hard determinism, which is just basically attempting to point at why responsibility and freedom would become problematic given an observation. Cause and effect being the antecedent to pretty much all phenomenon. So,
interesting. So, towards a certain extent, what we're actually looking at is that there are people that have their set minds or their set brains, and those set brains actually determine certain factors of their very behavior, in a sense. If I'm understanding that correctly, as you were stating it, and let alone just to actually hit up on your prior point, is that the universe, in a sense, is its own cause. If that is maybe I might have been a little more, okay, maybe I should think of something a little more nuanced than that. The universe is, the singularity in and of itself was the thing that brought forth the universe, and henceforth every antecedent position that the universe was in is a creation of a priori effect, causes, correct?
yeah, as far as we know, I would agree with that. Yeah. Just basically, you if I could, I mean, is this show, is it like geared toward children, or am I okay to like curse, or I don't want to
curse away, my friend? It is not.
I curse a lot, so I don't want to.
No, please feel free. Be you.
I appreciate that. No, I mean, I was just going to use an example. Like, you take a shit because you ate a sandwich, right? And you ate a sandwich because you were hungry, and you're hungry because you're, a mammal, right? And you're a human, and you're a human because, and you can just keep going back and following those breadcrumbs. It's just basically saying these are all of the factors that went into the next cycle of events. And then the idea is, okay, if that is happening, how much input do you have on any of those occurrences? All right. And you might say, well, I didn't go to a brain dealership, for example, and select the brain that I want. And I didn't pick out this one and say, hey, I'd like the brain with, OCD, or the brain that's going to excel in physics, or give me the brain with pedophilia tendencies, or right. You're not selecting the brain that you would have, right? Arguably for better or for worse, right? So you start off with particular equipment, and you take, let's say, well, let's not use us. Let's just say Jane Smith's brain and John Smith's brain, and let's say they're exposed to identical stimulus, right? They're both held in a room. They're being forced to listen to Metallica for 15 hours or something like this, right? Let's say the experiences are identical, but because the mediums to which it's processing this information are different, you can get two different outcomes. So whereas, John Smith might want to go shoot up a school as a result of that experience, Jane Smith might want to go to the next Metallica concert because she loved that compilation. Right? So that's kind of the idea, is that, we're all susceptible to, even down to identical influences. But again, given the equipment that we're beginning with, and how it's going to react and respond, you don't really have any say so in.
That is correct. But could you? Oh, sorry about that. My apologies. Please.
No, I was just going to put a little the icing on there before I finished. Is that, whether those actions are your putting on your shoes and dressing yourself before you leave your home versus leaving completely naked, right? The type of actions that you do may or may not be accepted by the specific society that you live in. Whereas one particular action that you do might land you in jail, and the other one might, land you a job or something like this. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I don't want to get too deep into it, but.
No, I actually love that, what you stated, because it's true. It seems like the hardware that people have, it's very difficult for them to, if it's even possible for them to separate from that said hardware. If you're hardwired to do specific things that within society would be called quote unquote detrimental, then sadly you would be that individual who would have tendencies to lean in that general direction because it's just the hardware that you have. But then I would have to say, could somebody, if necessary and with the proper preconditioning, be able to fight those urges in a sense? So let's just say we have hostile urges, but through, I don't know, maybe some sort of rehabilitation of the person in general, could they not be that way that their brain has kind of led them to be in through, let's just say, the sense of nurture, right? If we are nurturing this individual rather than having the nature in there, would that change anything in your opinion? Or do you think that the person is doomed to continuously fall within those said traits which are negative?
I appreciate you asking that question because it's something I do like to address. So, and again, not all of my views, guys, are very popular, so just bear with me. Just hear me out. The what did you say? The nature and nurture discussion, right? So I might particularly look at nurture as being a part of nature. So to me, it would be one complete circle. For example, if you're domino 10 in a row of 10, and the other dominoes are falling, we might say that, you know, it's determined that you're going to collapse after domino 9 strikes you. That would be the nature of things, let's say, right? This is going to take place because of these events. You're talking about an intervention in that phenomena, right? And sure, you could someone could stand in front of that 10th domino and put a finger in front of it and keep it from falling, sure. But the reason that person would do that, now we get back into, you know, why is somebody wanting to intervene? And you know, it's just another set of dominoes coming from another direction, in my opinion. But so yeah, I think, yeah, you know, this person that goes out and rapes somebody and the society, you know, puts them in jail, there could be a positive outcome from that, and that person could have children, and when they get out of jail, let's say, and that their children could cure cancer or something like this, right? We could arguably say that this was a positive that came from the therapy that
thing, right? The negative was able to create a positive through this other human being that was born from that.
Right, but the thing that probably would make people upset is if you start using language like it was necessary for X heinous act to take place in order for this person to have this revelation of societal commitment and et cetera, and then raising a child to cure cancer, right? And it's like humble beginnings begets this world-changing medicine, et cetera, right? So that's kind of the thing is, I mean, we really don't know. On the flip side of that, that person could go to jail and experience rapes of their own, right? And be released from the jail with additional, arguably negative
outcomes.
Correct. So, you know, I try to be careful with saying like in determinism, right? Or in the idea of determinism, not in determinism. But in the idea of determinism, I try to be careful about making any type of prophecy or anything like this. It's like, yes, the idea is that if you flip a coin and it lands on heads, do I say that it was always going to be the case that it was heads? I might say, well, you know, given the inertia of the coin, the weight of the coin, gravity pulling on it at 9.82 meters per second squared, and all the other factors that go into the angle that it's flipped at and the force, et cetera, that's all put into the coin being flipped. The air pressure in the room or outside, et cetera. All these things, right, would you put those factors into the equation to get out that heads, right? But I wouldn't say it was always going to be heads. I would just say that we can make a prediction. We can say, hey, can we build a mechanism that can accurately flip a coin on heads? And we probably could if we put our minds to it. But as accurate and as confident as I would feel in that outcome of a heads, I still wouldn't say that I know for certain that it would be heads. People think of the idea of like Minority Report, right? Where if we were able to be so specific and accurate with all of the precedents of antecedents into behavior. Somebody slapped Josh and Josh got angry. We can place these bets on responses, right? Based on the past. Sure, we could get to a certain level of confidence, but that isn't. I don't think we could ever, say for a fact that when you cut Josh in line and got that last Coke, that 6 months from now, Josh is going to run his car off of a bridge or something. I don't think we could ever get to that level of prediction. So it's not any woo-woo here where I'm saying we can have some type of prophecy, but it's interesting. It's like, solving a murder. You look back at the breadcrumbs and you find yourself, going backwards to the murder weapon, let's say, and to the motive, and to all of the things that led up to the case. So it's basically an investigation of what all has contributed to the action and so on. But
right, I completely agree with that, and I think that. I think the only thing that I would have to say, though, is that because it seems that wants aren't necessarily the thing that determine what a person is going to do within a particular circumstance, right? Like it's based on how they woke up that very morning, for instance, that will tack on to all the things that will most probably happen during that day, in a sense. Well, maybe not towards that extent, but like it's kind of like the mood and the habit that the person is underneath that'll slowly build up to, okay, well, somebody cut me off, let's just say. Now my anger, because this morning I didn't have my coffee, so that sent me down the spiral of, let's just say, being annoyed. And now, because this person cut me off, it's just like, okay, well, now I have more, let's just say, anger or animosity, or just have that extra layer of annoyance now that has just constantly keeps on growing until it kind of like snaps the person, in a sense, for them to act a specific way.
Look at it also like based on your available options. The options would dictate the course of action that you take. If you go into every store available in the world and there's only 2 sets of pants, red or purple. If we see Josh wearing purple pants, we can either assume that he wanted the red, but they sold out.
Right.
Or, the idea is, well, these are the only options that he had. So we don't ask the question why too deeply, right? Why is he wearing this particular color of pants if those are the only options available? Does that make sense? So it's
I see what you mean. I think I get the gist. Like it's not like I have a plethora of choices to do throughout that specific day or throughout that specific event. It's kind of like there's only those choices which are available to you at that specific time, if I'm understanding you correctly, or just those choices throughout your entire existence, in a sense. Either you do something or you do not do something, and henceforth, that's how your progress, let's just say, will lead you or determine your kind of outcome at whenever the life of that individual ends, in a sense, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah. I always like to speak in analogies just because I know it can be very convoluted. So I've used this analogy before about a grocery store. Basically, typically you don't vote for what gets put in the grocery store, right? The options are usually on the shelves when you arrive, right? And
Right.
So of the, you'll tell yourself that you're choosing of the available options. And if you think about, even if you did have the opportunity to vote for what you would like to propose for the grocery store to sell, that would be based on influences and perceived experiences that would lead you to make an educated selection for the store to have. You wouldn't offer them the idea of selling a Coke unless you had maybe tasted a Coke before or seen a Coke or knew about a Coke. So that would have to be introduced to you. So that's kind of the thing, is that every perceived choice that you're making is always going to be hijacked by influences and experiences that, in my view, typically are external to you. So, that's That's basically determinism in a nutshell. And then I know we're going to be tying this into theism, as you said in the beginning, with kind of the difference, I guess, between the deity in and of itself and the omni abilities, and then kind of a lot of the similarities or some of the issues that come across if determinism were to be true. So.
Right, exactly. But there's one thing, because I really do want to get into that as well, because I think that's going to be really interesting, let alone I'm having an interesting conversation right now just based on determinism itself. But I would say, right, wouldn't you say that, let's just say you have on the shelf, let's just use the store analogy, right? And just like you get Coke and you have Pepsi, right? If already your brain is predetermined to have the Coke, well, predominantly you would reach for that Coke rather than the Pepsi. That's just not something that you would have within your brain would already have a bias for the Coke rather than the Pepsi, and vice versa. If the person really likes the Pepsi, well, they're going to have that bias for the Pepsi and not the Coke. But I would like to state, though, is that could there be a mysterious option as well, where let's just say I went into the store with a preconceived notion of getting a Coke. Already that notion is within my brain. So I go and I reach for that Coke because it's already within my mind. But then it's something catches my eye and I look down and let's just say it's like cherry soda of some kind. And cherry soda is like my favorite soda. Now, all of a sudden I'm in a flux here, right? Because already I have my eye on the Pepsi, but now this mysterious item 3, item X, now appears. And I would think maybe that for certain individuals, what we would see is a battle of wants in a sense, where it's kind of like there's not really a want that overtakes itself. And sometimes people would even look at the back of the bottle in order to see what it has or what ingredients it has, let's just say, within it in order to make that decision for them. Sure. Would you say that mysterious item X would be maybe I wouldn't say indeterminism but I would say a probabilistic outcome that I would have more leanings towards mysterious item X than for the predetermined at that time wanting to go and buy the Pepsi? Or do you think that doesn't necessarily matter at all based on the equations?
I would say the latter. And the reason I say that is, I mean, there's a couple of different things. Right. Okay, so firstly, I always say, a brain like yours is going to do the things that you do because of influence experiences, right? So yes, you might go into the grocery store wanting a Coke, but this item X, as you're talking about, got your attention, and based on the information that you gathered from it, you might want that item instead. You're obligated to do what you want, and you can only want to do something again once you're exposed to it. Once you're confronted with X information. So it's entirely possible for you to. Now, here's the thing: if somebody were to record your grocery trip, right, and there's 10 aisles in the grocery store, and you only go to aisle 2, 3, and 4, and then you leave, right? And they had that foreknowledge of what your grocery trip's going to consist of. If they were to go back into the past, when you're entering the grocery store, and they were to block off the other aisles, you might think in that moment, hey, they're keeping me from going to these other aisles, right? But the reality is that you were never going to go to those aisles. You were going to go to 2, 3, and 4, or whatever I said, 3, 4, and 5. But because of this new influence, right, you might decide that maybe you do want to go to one of these other aisles. So that's what I was trying to say in the beginning, is that I'll never, in this Minority Report-esque way, say that this is always going to be the case, because I can't account for, these. I'm losing my train of thought. I can't account for any additional input, right? There's always something that can intervene, right? As we said, putting that in front of the dominoes, that would still be an influence in and of itself. So
that is true. That is true.
So
it's not actually destroying it. Well, it's not that it's destroying determinism, but it kind of is working alongside determinism, right? Because even that mysterious item X, because there's constantly other mysterious items around you, is that particular item because you already have a liking to cherry Coke to begin with. Now all of a sudden turns your attention to it rather than it being something that is outside of the norm that you've never tried before. So
here's the other thing, though. Here's the even more incredible thing. That item X, let's say, was invented by this lady from another country, and it just came out, that year, or whatever the details. If the parents of that person had an abortion, for example, item X wouldn't have been invented, and you wouldn't have been introduced to item X, and it wouldn't have caused you to deviate from the option that you were going to have. So it takes all of that up to that point for you to change your want, right? And you're completely ignorant of all of the details that went into that item being there on the shelf.
Interesting.
It could even have been down to the worker stocking the shelf who just didn't happen to put drinks on the shelf right at that moment. They were on their lunch break when you came in. And again, you're never introduced to that. Maybe you see it a week later and you said, oh, that drink, what are you drinking? And they say, oh, it just came out last week. And I didn't see that at the grocery store because Melvin was taking a longer cigarette break or whatever it was. It's always based on what's happening, right? It's simply put, cause and effect. So I would agree with you that your wants can change, and it's all based on what's being put in front of you at any given point in time.
Absolutely. And I think, like, as you stated, the reality is that there's so many intercedent times in the past that had to have taken place in order for that item to even appear before your very eyes to begin with. If that individual who created that particular Coke or that particular drink wasn't born, then you probably would not have that even as a thought process to begin with, because it wouldn't have been created.
All right.
Very interesting. That's a really interesting thought process. Okay.
And then the other thing is you're reading the ingredients, sure, and that might sway your want, but then when you actually taste the item, you might be reminiscent, or not reminiscent, but you might be disappointed, and you might say, wow, I should have got the other drink, right? There's no way for you to know. Even that individual in that situation is ignorant to what the effect would be, right? In tasting. So again, just like that individual reading the instructions or reading the ingredients that are in that soda, we have a good idea what it might taste like, but we can't actually know for sure until we actually taste it. So that's kind of what the idea of determinism is in a nutshell. But
that's right. So you might have a leaning towards it, but as soon as you taste it, it can be the nastiest thing you've ever tasted in your life, or actually something that wins you over and creates a nouveau want within your brain, in a sense, in order for you to be more biased towards this new product rather than to the product that you were used to prior to, right? And then, okay.
And like the thing, this last thing I want to say about this before we move on to the God talk, but that whole thing with the flipping of the coin, and we're feeling all good about ourselves having this mechanism, this machine that can flip a coin accurately, and we know all of the math and the variables. A bird could swoop in and grab it out of the air, and we didn't account for that. It's just, and why is that bird there in that particular? I always say it's if you were to backtrack everyone's actions, it's kind of like COVID-19 with contact tracing. When somebody does something, you say, well, why did that person do this? And if you backtrack and you say, okay, these are all of the things that have happened. This is where we are now. What's going to take place from that point? We can make predictions, but we don't really know. Anyway, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse.
No, but I like the elaboration, because sometimes maybe individuals just came in and they haven't necessarily heard our conversation so far. So maybe that elaboration would help them understand what the subject matter and topic matter is and a more in-depth understanding of it. Or maybe while we were talking, people might have not necessarily understood the gist of what we were saying. So maybe a little bit more information would be beneficial for the viewers in general, you know, just to understand the content matter. So I don't mind if people beat a dead horse in that case, because as much information which is there is beneficial. Is beneficial information, in my opinion. Also, before we continue, I do want to say hi to the people inside the comment section. So Eric, Misha, Mishima, my apologies, welcome. And KCA Randy, welcome, my friend. Hope you're having a good time. Hope you both are having a good night. Linear, thank you so much again for excellent adminship or moderation. Thank you very much. And again, if anybody has any questions, please ask some questions. We love questions here on this show. So if you got any questions based on determinism, please ask away. So back to the conversation. Now, because I think that, as you stated, we kind of delved into the determinism with when we're talking about universal structures, and let alone just everyday life in general, just how it's kind of determined in certain processes, or it seems that it's determined in every processes based on how we broke it down. So now let's bring God into the equation. This tri-omni deity, which is there. My question would be, what do you think, or do you believe that the theist is maybe not misunderstanding, but looking at events happening, not necessarily understanding or seeing the causes and effects which are happening, and they are then construing within that idea that there has to be something like a prime mover, in a sense, or like a prime entity that had to begin the causes and effects in the first place. But what they're actually believing in is just the causes and effects in and of themselves, the natural causes and effects, rather than the supernatural entity creating these causes and effects.
Well, so first of all, yes, I strongly agree with you. That's actually a position that I take, is that the theist, or even the deist, any person believing any type of deity that believes there is some type of plan or organization would have to consider this concept of determinism. So, for example, the type of questions I usually get into with the theists, I do kind of shy away from scripture talk, just because I don't really find much ground gained in those types of conversations. But anyway, one of the questions that I ask is, did your deity have any say-so in existing the way that it does, right? So they say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, it's let's just use Christianity in general, for example, or one of the Abrahamic beliefs. It's omnibenevolent, it's omniscient, omnipotent, et cetera, right? It's omni, right? All anything, whatever you want, put it all in there. So I say, well, this deity exists. This deity existed all the time. It's always existed. Did it have any say in being in the position that it's in? And in other words, you could say, did it choose to exist in the way that it does?
Interesting.
If they say no, then I would say, well, what's the opposite? If an action is going to take place and there was no choice involved, you might say jumping off of a bridge versus you falling off of a bridge, or somebody throwing you off of a bridge, right? We would use the word that you were forced off of the bridge, right? By whatever, a dog, wind, earthquake, another person even, right? There's some other phenomenon taking place that is guiding you to that outcome, even though it's not something you necessarily wanted, right? You didn't want this. So they typically respond with, well, that's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. The deity didn't choose to exist. It just always existed, because you wouldn't be able to choose if you didn't exist. So I said, okay, so if you're saying there was no choice involved with the way that the deity, is in existence, it kind of sounds like it was forced to be an omni deity. So that's something that kind of makes them uncomfortable. When you talk about the omniscience of the deity, back to that Coke and Pepsi, if you're omniscient and you know that you're going to drink the Coke when you're presented with that opportunity, if you get to that place and you say, well, even though I know I'm going to drink the Coke, I still have the option I'm going to drink Pepsi because I have free will, then you really didn't know your future, right? You didn't know what your next action was going to be. So that's a contradiction of the omniscience. You would have to do what you know that you're going to do.
Right.
But then it becomes even more of a problem because, again, all these superpowers, right? The omnipresence, right? The ability to be everywhere at once. And then the omniscience ties in with that as well, right? If you know everything that's going to take place and everything that did take place and everything that's happening now simultaneously, then in the invention of, let's say, the apple that grows from a tree, you're existing in two periods, right? You're existing in the period where you're planting that seed, but you're also eating that apple simultaneously.
Interesting.
Right? So if you're in both of these two ends of the
time scale
of the omni time, we'll call it, right?
Right. Omni time. Good point.
If you're if you're in both of these periods, right, you know that on the apple eating side, we'll keep it simple, that Josh is going to pray for the dog that was in the backseat of his car when he crashed. The dog was bleeding out, and he's praying for that dog to survive. And the deity knows, I'm going to go and save that dog, right, and make everything better. On the seed planting side, right, the deity knows that when I create Josh, he's going to get into this accident and he's going to ask me to help save his dog. And I know I'm going to save the dog. And some people would say, so Mike, are you saying why not just have him avoid that accident altogether? And I don't really care about that part. What does it matter? The dog's saved. What I'm getting at is, why have Josh pray for it?
Good point.
Why is that part of the plan, that you would beg for an outcome that you would prefer? And you might say, well, what does it matter? My dog is saved. But then there's the doppelganger Josh, whose cat didn't survive, even though he prayed. So we're in the same situation where the deity knows they're going to create this other Josh who has a cat who's going to be injured in a car accident, and Josh is going to pray for it to be saved, and I know I'm not going to save it. Well, why have Josh beg for it if you know you're not going to do anything about it? So when you bring these things up to the theists, they say, well, it's part of God's plan. And that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, is why is Josh begging for the life of somebody that's not going to be granted? Why is that included in the plan? And also, I'm sure you've heard this many times, you're not persuading the deity to do something different, right? You're not surprising it. You're not saying, hey, I have a better idea than what you intended to do. And the deity's not saying, yeah, let me take you up on that. That's a good idea. Right? So you're obligated by the plan to, as I said, beg to not get what you want. And they look at it like, well, I have the free will to pray. So if I'm going to say, if I don't pray to see what the deity is going to do, you know what I mean? The deity is responding to my prayer to save them. But it doesn't make sense when you think of it like that. If the deity is omniscient, as I said, and it knows everything that's going to take place, including its own actions,
right,
then you begging in the middle there, you're obligated to do that, regardless if you get the outcome that you want or not. If you say, well, how does that tie into determinism? And it's like, well, if the deity didn't want the cat to survive, for example, why? Let's make it a human instead, right? Let's make it a human. Why then, you would ask, why would the deity allow for this child to exist up to a certain point, just to have somebody beg for it, and then just to have it expire, right? And then the same question would go to if there are individuals that the deity disapproves of, right? The deity's this close to flooding the earth again because of all of these fuck ups, right? All these people messing up on the planet. It's kind of like, well, aren't you, you're omniscient, right? So if you're in the know that you're going to be disappointed by all of these individuals that you're going to create, hey, in 20 years, this person is going to do this, and this is going to make me upset. And then, 20 years later, you get to that point, they do the thing that you knew they were going to do, and then you get upset. It's kind of, you're mad about the thing that you set into motion, including the fact that you would be mad.
Exactly. Oh, that's actually a pretty good thing to actually bring up. It's true, because you already know the outcome if you have omnipresence. You already know the outcome of the situation that's going to happen.
Omniscience and omnipresence, yeah.
Oh, omniscience and omnipresence. Thank you very much for that clarification. You already know what's going to happen, and henceforth, why would you be upset based on that said knowledge if you already know what's going to happen based on that superpower of omniscience and omnipresence? In a sense, and that's where I come in and I say, well, the deity already knowing all of this would be in a place of contentment, in a sense. It would be content with the environment that it's in the first place. So there wouldn't be any anger. There wouldn't be anything like that, because it already has the knowledge that all these things are going to happen. And henceforth, it wouldn't have anger to these things that are happening. The only time where you would have anger is if you had no idea of what the outcome would have been in the first place. Then something happens to mess up your plan, and then you get angry. I was planning on going to the McDonald's, but Buddy decided to ram into my car, and now I can't get to the McDonald's, or whatever the situation is. Or it'll take me longer to get to the McDonald's because now I got to walk instead of drive to the location where I want to be. So henceforth, I will be angry at that particular individual or at that particular event happening. So that's where, for me, I wonder how the theist can reconcile anger with any of the omnis. It doesn't make any sense. And it would seem that it runs into a conundrum if you put that in those type of equations.
Well, it's even worse than that. I had a conversation with a theist recently where I said, a choice is a selection between two options at minimum. Would you agree with that? You have to have two options for a choice, hypothetically, right, to be on the table, right? Salt or pepper, or Dom Perignon versus cat piss, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So, a choice is a selection between two options at minimum, and you would typically weigh out pros and cons, and then you would commit and make a selection. I said, the deity. I asked him, would you say that the deity decided to create the earth, for example? That conversation turned into, well, yeah, I guess, the God could have decided not to create the earth, and it did. So that would be a choice. And I said, well, I wouldn't look at a choice as an abstention, right?
Right.
I'm not being a dragon or a nose hair right now, but I don't have any say so, in that disposition, right?
That's true.
It would have to be an actionable thing, for the deity would have to actually be doing something. So I said, to make it easier, you could look at it like the deity is going to create the moon and the earth, right? Those are the two things. It's deciding which one to do first. So it picked the earth first. And I said, what do you think about that? And he agreed. So I said, okay, so given those options, the deity would have to create the options in order to select from them, right?
Okay.
And he agreed. He said, yeah, he's the creator of all options, which sounds nice until I said, okay, well, then my point is, how would the deity choose to create the options to choose from? And because you would need options to choose and ad infinitum, you would. So that's something I like to get into. Obviously, is the origin of choice. What would have been the first choice? For the first choice to take place, there would have to be options to choose from.
Right.
And that's where the problem of the omnipotent creating deity comes from, is because if you're going to charge everything to this deity and say, well, yeah, it came from the deity created everything, including all options. Well, you just fucked up, because now you're saying there was no choice involved in creating those first two options. The deity was obligated to do that. The deity was forced to do that.
Right.
And that kind of gets back into saying, well, basically the deity is determined like the rest of us.
That's right. It had no choice in being the deity in the first place.
Well, think about this: to create the very first whatever it wanted, whatever you want, a lollipop, an atom, a quark, whatever it is, that it's the first thing it says I'm going to create. It has to want to do that.
Good point.
And to want, as we said in the beginning, to want anything, to desire anything, you have to have some knowledge of that thing. And you said, well, Mike, didn't you just say the deity is omniscient? And it's like, right, but the omniscience would be nonsensical if nothing existed, right? If you're knowledgeable about everything after the creation of them, right? That eating that apple, but you're still over here and you haven't invented the seed. Then you're wanting to create that apple seed. Follow along. This is going to get a little complex, right? But if you're wanting to create that apple seed, it's because you know about apples prior to you creating anything.
That's true.
And you wouldn't necessarily be able to actually pinpoint a place where the deity actually does anything, because
it would be stuck.
Well, it's already done everything.
Interesting. So in a sense, it's within its own conundrum, because it's already done everything, but everything has yet to be created at the same time.
Correct. It's all simultaneous, right?
So it's sort of like it's this milieu that you can't get out of. It's kind of just this process that creates a non-process.
Right. Like, the deity is already experiencing you in heaven with it. It already knows what it's like for you to be in heaven with it, right? You're just going through your trials and tribulations and rigmarole now, but the deity is already experiencing time with you in heaven. Even before you were born, you were already in heaven chilling with the deity. And the flip side, those people are already in hell burning before they're even born, right? In the deity's experience.
Right. So what would be, in a sense, the reason for these trials or tests or tribulations, in a sense, if these sequences of events are already playing out prior to the existence of that particular individual? If I'm understanding a bit of
that comes full circle to what typically the theist would say is the deity's nature, which it had no choice in.
Wow. So it sort of comes, as you stated, full circle right back to where did the first choice come from, and how did the first choice get created in the first place? or not created, but how was it thought up of in the
Right.
first place?
Did your God create choice? And if so, did it choose to? You know? So
I love that. I love that.
that's why it becomes a problem when you're talking to theists and they're praying or they want something to happen and they say this is, you know, this tornado or whatever that we prayed for and we didn't get what we wanted, it destroyed the neighborhood and all these people died. It's part of the deity's plan. And it's like, well, I would say, well, the earth turning and gravity and et cetera, these are all the phenomena that take place and, you know, it begets a tornado. You're saying the same thing that I'm saying, but you're saying that there's an intent, there's an intention behind what we've all identified as a tornado, right? We can,
Right.
So another thing I just wanted to add just really quick, you're making me think of the whole omniscience thing. Again, and in my view, if such a God were to exist, it would be obligated to do all of these things. It wouldn't be able to stop itself from being itself, sort of a thing.
Interesting.
Right. So if it's omniscient and it's creating an atheist, a Muslim, and a Christian, and let's just say this is the Christian's version in general, right? The Christian's version of the Abrahamic God. Or let's just say, actually, let's just say a Buddhist, an atheist, or well, let's let's say a Jain, an atheist, and a Christian.
Okay.
It's funny because they say, well, you know, these individuals have free will, and they can either choose to go towards the deity and, you know, follow whatever in the holy book or not, and then based on what they decide, it's on them that, you know, something happens to them or they don't get this everlasting life or whatever it is, right? They put it all on the humans as far as their choices are concerned. Right. And I say, well, if the deity knows that, hey, when I create Josh is going to maybe dabble a little bit in religion and then end up being an atheist. Mike is going to be an atheist. And I'm basically going to supply Satan with these individuals, right? And, you know, try as people might to convince them of Christianity. It's not going to take well to them because of the brains that they have. And these are all of the influences that in their life that are it's just not going to mesh with them and they're going to die atheists, right? So I'm going to supply Satan, for example, with these two individuals. On the other hand, I also know that Wendy is going to be a Christian. She's going to be raised a Christian. She's going to die a Christian and she's going to end up in heaven. So when someone like me says, well, why don't you just start everybody off, you know, in heaven? Or why don't you just reveal yourself to everybody, right? They always say, well, it's because the deity gave us free will, and they go into that whole thing. Just like I said, back to Wendy, if you're omniscient and you know Wendy is going to be that Christian that you want them to be, and you know that Wendy's going to end up with you, then you're already doing that. You're already creating humans that will be guaranteed to be in heaven.
Right, exactly.
So if you're already creating the humans that won't upset you, that you won't have to flood an earth to destroy and all these types of things, why are you spending energy creating other humans that will detract from that or that will diverge from what it is that you want? So that argument doesn't make any sense. Now, the only thing I can think of if the deity were to exist is that it has no choice but to create people to be that way.
Exactly. And in a sense, it is. Sorry about that.
No, I'm rambling.
No. But I completely agree with what you're stating, and I think when we really look at it, is kind of stating that the deity in itself is caught up underneath events or circumstances which are outside of its control, and that when we really look at that prospect, then you slowly start to see the falling apart of the omni arguments, because if you're supposed to be omnipotent, there you go, that's what I was trying to say, omnipotent, then the reality of the situation is that that's where everything, or no, not omnipotent, my apologies, omnibenevolent, right? You're being omnibenevolent, or this deity is trying to be omnibenevolent, but it's already has a preconceived notion of sending people to hell. But it can't stop itself, right? It can't stop itself from doing so. And henceforth, that omnibenevolence is a thing that gets X'd off the actual criteria of what a god or what this omni deity is supposed to be in the first place, because it can't have it if it's already like a machine just pumping out people that is just a flip of the coin, either if they're bad or if they're good. But he or it cannot dictate the outcomes of what those individuals are going to believe in or not believe
in. Yeah. Well said. I would add, somebody might say, well, you're trying to say that my God is constrained to its own abilities that it didn't choose to have. But you know what? It's omnipotent, so it can do anything, right? It can do all things. So how do we know it didn't place the events that would take place on its own yellow brick road? And, was in complete control of all the things that would take place, right? And, I had to say to that, well, in order for it to do that, it would have to know that it was going to change what it knew it would know before it knew it would know it, which is ridiculous.
Right.
Like, I know I'm going to drink this Coke when I approach it, and there's going to be a Pepsi there, and those are the only two options. I know I'm going to drink that Coke. So to get out of that, I'm going to make them both Pepsis. Right. But in order for you to do that, you would have to know that you were going to change what you knew you would know. Right. But you're still back in the same situation. That's why I say that last part. You'd have to do it before you knew you would know it. So there would have to be a period of ignorance where the deity is constantly keeping itself ignorant, so it can just simply say it's not obligated to do the thing it knows it's going to do, which is ridiculous.
That is, but it's true. I seriously think when you're looking at it, it's mind blowing when you really think of it, though, because if you don't, and you kind of just walk with the idea of an omni being, or as Muslims sometimes like to say, an absolute being, then you run into massive amounts of issues with these criteria of this being, because they run not in tandem with each other, they run against each other to begin with. So these three omni aspects destroy the omni criteria automatically. One destroys the other one destroys the other, and what you're left with is a being that does not have any of the omnis. And then we're actually starting to look at, well, now we know this being is constrained within a certain paradigm, in a sense. Now, if a being even exists, that is.
Oh yeah, it's all,
Yeah, but then all of a sudden it would be, well, if this being comes from, and like how I like to state, can a being be a mind or disembodied mind, or does it have to be a biological mind or a biological entity that a mind is within in the first place? And henceforth, only through a certain amount of maybe technological advancement or something like that brings forth an aspect of quote unquote a deity or deity-esque being. But that's only because of technological advancement. If we really look at anything else, there's no disembodied mind which is out there in the first place.
Yeah, but I mean, the big takeaway from this for anyone watching is, it could be a mind, it could be some blobulous jellyfish-looking thing, whatever you want. The issue is, are you in any control of how you've arrived, or not want to say arrived, but did you have any say-so in existing in the way that you do? None of us presumably were able to vote to be here, right? We were forced to exist. But for some reason, this is a pain point with a lot of the theists. They say, well, the God has always existed, and it's like that's fine. Did your deity have any say in always existing? Right. So that's a problem, because why aren't you worshiping the thing that obligated the deity to always exist? And so, and then just the last point I want to make is, if we were to entertain the idea of free will, I always like to ask, how would that work? Describe to me from point A to B to C, picking up a glass of water and drinking it. Explain to me what happens from the brain to the hand to the glass to consumption of the water. And what ends up happening is they say, well, I picked up the glass because I wanted to. And then I ask, well, why did you want to? And then they say, well, because I was thirsty, or because it was you asked me to show you what free will is, or whatever reason there was, which was the influence, the catalyst that caused them to. It's just really silly to me, or they'll say, I chose to pick up the water. Well, why did you choose to? Because I wanted to. And why did you want to? Because I chose to. Well, hold on, you said that you chose to because you wanted to, and then when I asked you why you wanted to, you said that you chose to. So now we're in this vicious circle of you're realizing you didn't choose to exist. You didn't choose to be human. You didn't choose, we can go down the list and I can, beat that dead horse again. Right. But yeah, I mean, anybody watching that's having a conversation with theists about free will, just ask them how it works. Just use a simple thing like drinking a glass of water. Explain from inception, the conceptualizing of water and why you would go after it, why you would desire it, and where that comes from. And once they realize the moment they can say that they're choosing their next idea, like, a claw going down into one of those arcade games and grabbing a ball or a toy or something and pulling it out, right? Like, oh, I'm going to decide to think about coffee, right? The moment you can do that, you might have a point. You might have some meat to cook there, but obviously that doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Because you'd still be choosing to think about something.
Very good point. Very good point. And that's the thing. But because we're on top of the hour at this very moment, I believe that we're going to close the show down. But again, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a delightful conversation. I loved it from beginning to end. So I really do appreciate you coming on and really having this discussion with me and helping us really get to the meat and potatoes of determinism and the deterministic process when it comes to just normal everyday life to the deity in and of itself. So I've had a great time. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate it, everybody, anybody watching. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if there's anything in the future that you would want to come on to the show, let me know, and I would 100% love to have you on the show again, because we have such great conversations. So I would love to do that. Everybody inside the comment section, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for liking. And if you haven't subscribed as of yet, please smack that like button, smack that subscribe button. If you do wish to be a Patreon supporter for the Atheist Enlightenment, I'm going to put on the where am I? I'm going to put on the link inside the comment section below. So if you ever do want to just come in, look around, and if you like what you see, please become a Patreon supporter. If not, then it's awesome that you even stopped by and just looked at what we have. And Let me actually do that right now. This computer is not mine, so it's very difficult to work. Okay. Now, everybody, let's make this enlightenment together. Thank you so much for coming on, and see you next week, same time, 10 p.m. EST, 9 p.m. CT, and 7 p.m. PST. Thank you again for stopping by. This is the Atheist Enlightenment coming to an end. Have a great night and love you all.